Guibh go léir accordia agus tá fáil se wrote. Welcome to Be My Guest with me, Mary Honan, on Lear Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary, Clare's Wish Foundation in Limerick, and Deal Animal Rescue in West Limerick. And listen, I have been waiting for this woman for so long to come on the show. I said to myself at one stage, she's hiding from me. She's
I'm hiding from you.
every excuse not to come on. And that's Toba Abramczyk from Toronto in Canada. Hi, Toba.
Hi, Mary. Or should I call you Mary?
What?
Or should I call you Mary?
Mary. Yeah, you always call me Mary. But, I'm surprised that you were reluctant or nervous or anything, because you're not backward in coming forward. You like to give your opinions on things, and you've been on my show before, albeit not on camera.
That's the reason. I can talk in front of 500 people and it doesn't bother me, but to be on camera bothers me for some reason. My eyes are darting, don't know where to look, things like that, But
No, you're looking perfectly at the camera now. That's fantastic. But Toba, I got to know you, I suppose, during my PhD research, and I got to know you on Facebook. And it's funny how Facebook, sometimes you look and you think the people that you meet on Facebook, you consider lifelong friends now, and you've never physically met them. And you're in my top, I suppose, two. Certainly, I would say probably the top of my Facebook friends that I've made, that I feel I've known all my life.
Well, we have so much in common. That's why we're on the same level of playing ground, if you know what I mean. Our interests are the same, and our passions for what we do are the same.
That's it. To bring the audience, I suppose, up to date, Toba, your beautiful dad, Myra Abramczyk, was a survivor of several camps during World War II, and you absolutely just worshipped the ground the man walked on. Can you tell me, Toba, Myra's story, your dad's story, prior to being your dad?
Yeah. My father was born 1926 in Bełchatów, Poland, to Toba and Herschel Abramczyk. He had 4 sisters and 2 brothers. I hope you don't mind if I mention their names. It's a mitzvah to say so. He had 2 older sisters, Zelda and Hilda. He had 2 older brothers, Moshe and Yankel, and he had 2 younger sisters, Paula and Hannah. In 1940, when Germans invaded Poland, they came into the town. They took my father, who was 13 at the time, and sent him off to Poznan. From Poznan to Dor Mittelbau to Gross Rosen, quite a few camps. He ended up in Auschwitz in August 27th, 1942. And in 1942, the Nazis came back into Bełchatów and took the remaining citizens and sent them to Chełmno, which they were put in vans and gassed. So my father's mother and father and his 2 youngest sisters were sent to Chełmno. One of the older brothers was shot on Roundup. I'm not sure which Roundup. And in 1942, the 2 older sisters and 1 brother were sent to Łódź, and they worked as making uniforms and shoes. And then in 1944, when the ghetto was liquidated, they were again sent to Chełmno. So my father was the only survivor of the immediate family, and I believe I know of one first cousin who survived.
It's funny, when I was doing my research, Chełmno or Kulmhof was the one that really stuck out in my head, because it was probably the first gas chambers at Chełmno, and they used vans, for anyone who didn't know. And what they would do would be they would bring the prisoners to Chełmno, which was an old kind of like a castle. And then they'd bring them in, they'd ask them to change their clothes, and they'd tell them they were going for a shower. And then they'd lead them into what they thought was a room, but was actually into a van that was brought up to the side of the door. And then they would close the door of the van and gas, and then bury them in the woods. But it became, they ended up, that's how Auschwitz and that was built, because they couldn't gas enough people at a time. Right. By that. It just, that was that, and if you actually look, Toba, at the book Briar Rose, it's a fairy tale, and Briar Rose turns out to be a victim of the Holocaust, and she was actually in Kulmhof and Kelmno, or Kelmno as it's called in English, but that's based loosely on Kelmno.
I am reading a book right now on that subject, so that's not the name of it. I can't remember the name of it, but excuse me. I'm trying to find out as much as I can. I look for names, I look for faces, I look for pictures, anything. I have nothing. So, excuse me, everything I look for, I'm trying to find something to grasp, to hold on to. I've met so many people on Facebook. I met a woman whose mother was my father's next door neighbor when he was a kid. So there's this interconnection. And if you look hard enough and long enough, you'll find it. It just takes time. But I think my father told me up until 42, when his parents were gone, that's the last correspondence, because they used to get care packages and postcards. And not until somebody from his town came, because I think in 44, some of the people went from Lodz went to Chelmno, and some went to Auschwitz. They were parceled out. And I think somebody from my father's town came in 44, and that's when my father found out that there was nobody left. So,
people think that when the war ended, that the trauma ended for these people, and that they were saved. In many respects, those that survived, survived the remainder of their lives destined and haunted, in some cases haunted by their memories, in many cases not wanting to talk about their experiences, and in other, quite a number of cases, people who felt utterly compelled to recall what they had gone through in order that it wouldn't happen again. And it seems like a cliche that it doesn't happen again. That's what I have on the back here. Remember, never shall I forget the little faces of the children whose bodies turned into wreaths of smoke beneath a silent blue sky. And I do think that, reticence and sitting back and saying, oh, that happened 70 odd years ago, it should be left in the past. We are destined to repeat, and we can see it happening every day of the week now.
Every day of the week. Yeah, education is the key, and if you're silent and you say nothing, then you let it happen. It's like I said to you once before, that poem that I love. They came for me and no one was left to speak. And we as children of survivors and those who are not deniers, speak up. And we want to educate. We are the voices of 6 million. We are the voices of those that have left us as survivors. And we need to speak up and see when there's an injustice. It doesn't matter what faith you are, what part of the world it is, whether it's Jew or Gentile or whatever. We need to speak up. And if we stay silent, it just happens before our eyes, and then it becomes, oh, I should have said something, like in anything, and we need to educate. That's the bottom line.
Well, we also need to be cognizant of human beings' ability to always be looking for an other.
That's right.
Always trying to other somebody, instead of saying that, well, in actual fact, and I think I actually said it in my book, in actual fact, we are all connected by the fact that we are other, because I'm other to you, you're other to me. And what connects us is the fact that we're different, but and in that sense, we are self because even within ourselves, if you philosophically, even within ourselves, that we have multiple others. The other that I project to you will be different from the other I'll project to somebody who I probably don't know very well. And I think it was Elie Wiesel who said no, it was actually Jacques Derrida who said that in order to understand the other, you must first understand the other within yourself.
Well, it's the old saying, if it's not affecting me in any way, why bother?
Why bother? And it's back to what you said, Reverend Niemöller's quote. First, they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me.
Those are very wise words. Don't always look to the person behind you to step up to the plate. You step up to the plate. You have a big mouth, you open it. If you feel it, somebody once said to me, I saw something happening in a store and I spoke up, and somebody said, it's not your business. And I said, behind closed doors, it's not my business, but in front of me, publicly, it becomes my business. And I will speak up, and I did. And the person who I was defending was very grateful, and the person who had the big mouth walked away sulking. Don't bully. You're not going to bully in front of me. And not way. And, people say, no, it's not your business. In front of me is my business.
It absolutely is. And I think it's a crime now, actually, if you knowingly are aware of somebody being abused physically, even within a home, and you do nothing. You're
just as guilty. You may not hold the gun, but if you know that it happened, you're just as guilty.
Absolutely. But Toba, what happened to your dad? How did he his experiences when he was released and he got out of when the war ended? He moved to Israel, didn't he? And he worked.
Actually, he went to Germany. He went to Regensburg. What happened was when they did the death march in 1945, January, he said they walked back and forth. They got on trains, they got off trains. They ended up in Hamburg near Lübeck Bay. And they were told May 3rd that it was end of April. They were told the war is over. You're free to go, but you need to go on these boats. And these boats will take you north. And so they barged them out to boats. There's about 20,000 people on the shores. And they barged them out to a boat I know I've discussed with you, Cap Arcona. Yeah. And there's about 10,000 people on that boat. And they knew when they got on that it was more of a death camp there, because they spent many, many hours throwing bodies overboard to, Yeah. And the boats were laden with explosives, and they were going to blow up these boats on the way out. And the RAF got a hold of the information, and they were told that there were high-ranking officials on the boats, and they came and they strafed the boats. They were told not to. They finally got the communique that it wasn't the case, but they strafed the boats. And 3 times, my father hung onto the anchor for about 2 hours, and was picked up by an English fishing vessel and taken to, I don't even know, to Lübeck. And from there, he went to a DP camp, Fornwald. And from there, he went to Regensburg for a little bit with his friends and the people who had survived with him. And then from there, he went to Israel and he joined the army. But of 20,000 people, I believe, of 20,000 people on the shore, involved that day, there was little less than 1,300 people that survived, because those that were blown, those that fell into the water, those that actually swam to shore were being shot by brown shirts and townspeople. And not until the English army came in and stopped it. So my dad was one of 250 survivors on that boat of between 8,000 and 10,000 people.
God Almighty, he suffered not alone being in several camps, separated from his family, the only survivor, if you like, and then when he thinks he's safe, he has to struggle in the seas or in the water.
That's it. How many people people were in the camps and were liberated and finally made it after so many years and took a bite of food they shouldn't have taken. And, you know, it wasn't the right thing to do. I mean, my dad always said it was just luck. Nothing but luck.
And even the Greek Jews were the first to die in the camps because they didn't speak Yiddish. They didn't speak German, so they didn't understand when they were being ordered to do things. You were lucky in a sense if you understood Yiddish. If you spoke Yiddish, you had an understanding of German. So you could understand.
It was a brutal time. It turned nice people into animals. And one of the reasons was they weren't going to be harmed. You could do what you wanted to do and nothing. And, you know, it's the frenzy of the mob. It's one guy does it, the other gets away with it, the next person will do it, then the next person will do it. All of a sudden you've got a mob mentality going after innocent people walking down the street. You have it now.
Yeah.
You have it in all walks of life now, in all faiths, all corners of the world, right?
Yeah, and when you look at it as well, sorry, Toba?
This needs one person to start it.
And add to the fact that it's governmental sanctioned. When you're told that it's totally legal to do this, these people are subhuman. These people are barely human. Not as we would understand the term human is what many of them.
As my dad said, you know, they're in their house and someone says, you know, your neighbor has 2 cows and you only have 1. If you get rid of your neighbor, now you have 3. And that's what was going on. So, you know, my dad says they're marching you out the back door and someone's coming into your house to live from the front door. And that's what was happening because there was no crime, no punishment.
There was no, absolutely. And that's the worst. That's the worst when people are, and I mean, I interviewed Thomas Reichenthal, and when he went back to Bergen-Belsen to try and meet up with Hilda Michnier or Hilda Lisiewicz, who was one of the prison guards, she gave an interview to the Bergen-Belsen archives years previously, and she said that she was fascinated with the Nazi uniform and that she loved the men in uniform and that she loved the glamour of having her nails done and her hair done. And many of these people were poverty stricken, uneducated, and that's who they targeted. And if they're told you're doing the right thing and you're doing it for God and you're doing it for your country.
And the reward is great. For whatever it is that you do it in peace because the reward is great. The reward is greater than the punishment, if ever a punishment. How many people got away with it? Thousands.
And how many Jews fought in World War I and were decorated, and irrespective of the decorations were murdered?
How many Jews served in the Polish army?
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
And you know, neighbors turned against neighbors. And I worry that this is happening now with, say, COVID and things like that, where you have people saying, oh, name and shame. I see it on different boards and things like that, you know, name and shame somebody for not wearing a mask or not doing A, B, C, or not social distancing, or having somebody, you know, I mean, I think I worry that about this, you know, turning neighbor against neighbor, and you're good if you do one thing and you're not good if you do another thing, and neighbors turn against neighbors for the least thing because they think they're on the right side.
There was something on somebody posted, I think it was in Australia, where somebody posted a vacation picture and their neighbors called the police and said, our neighbors have been away for 2 weeks and it's a stay-at-home thing. And the police came ready to write out a ticket. And the person goes, those are my vacation photos from 2 years ago. Like, here's the date stamp on here. And the police had to say, oh, I'm sorry. I mean, this is what's happening. People are calling saying there's somebody at my neighbor's door in a car and it's somebody delivering groceries. I mean.
And that's what I worry that governments do. They pit neighbor against neighbor. You start with the neighbor telling them you're doing the right thing now. Be a good citizen and tell us if this person or anyone you see of your neighbors who might have been your friends. Family members are telling on family members at the moment, and you worry about that Martin Niemöller quote, first they came for the communists.
Yeah, it's, I see it every day. I see it in the grocery store. I see the arguments. I see the fights in the parking lot. You know, You don't want to wear a mask, don't wear a mask. You don't want to get vaccinated, don't get vaccinated. Stay home, order your groceries online, work from home. Don't be around me. If you don't want to do it for yourself, don't do it for yourself. But there are 100 people behind you that are affected by your actions. Your grandchildren, your children, your nieces, your nephews, your sisters, your brothers, your mothers, your grandparents. You don't want to do it, that's fine. Stay home.
This is my attitude. You know, I mean, you have no idea why people choose not to or choose to wear masks and things like that, and just assume that they have a medical reason for not wearing it, or they have a fear of, or they're claustrophobic or whatever. But don't go down the road that the world went in a smaller scale, if you like. I mean, if Nazism had been allowed to take hold and global, like this has taken hold globally, God knows what way things would have gone, even worse than if it's imaginable. But Toba, how important was Israel to your dad and people like him, who finally had their homeland and finally had a place that welcomes them instead of repelling them?
Well, I think those that came from Germany or Poland or Italy or wherever it was and settled in Israel found it to be their duty to uphold semblance, order, make sure that it thrived and grew. And this was a place where a huge percentage of people came who were from literally on the same boat.
Yeah.
Family, had no one, had nowhere else to go, didn't want to go back to their hometown. I'm reading a really good book called The Last Million, about the last million people who survived the war. And we don't want to go back to Poland, and we don't want to go back here, and how the governments were saying, well, we'll take 10, but we won't take 15. And you need to go back, and you can't immigrate because of, and people were screaming, we cannot go back there. We survived 5 years, 2 years, 1 year. We lost our families, and you want us to walk back with our heads held high into a hostile environment where we could be shot just walking down the street, which many did when they came to say, hey, that's my house, that's my store. I want it back. They survived all this horror only to be murdered when they walked down the street. So Israel, it was their haven, it was their home, and they worked very hard to ensure that they were safe. My dad, I have pictures of my father dressed in white cooking potatoes. And this whole time I thought my dad was a cook. He was a this, he was a that. I never thought he saw combat or did anything other than he was in the kitchen. And I have lots of pictures of him in uniform, dress uniform, and other uniforms. And then I showed his insignia to someone, and they said to me, your father was in the engineer corps. He was a bomb detonator by his little insignias. Never knew, never spoke about it. Just said, yeah, I was a soldier. I did what I was told. You do what you're told. One day you peel potatoes, and one day you're patrolling. One day you're clearing swamps. One day, he says, I drove a truck, I drove a tank, I drove a motorcycle. You just did what you had to do. There was no, I'm better than you, you outrank me, I'm not part of this. Everybody worked to the same exhaustion and it wasn't an easy time in 48. They came with, the war and the whole business, and they were on alert. They didn't take it easy. They still don't take it easy. They still don't relax.
Isn't it interesting, though, you talk about why would we go back to that country? That would be my attitude. Why would anybody go back to a country that treated them so badly, and not just treated them, but treated their family members, especially those who lost nearly all their family members except maybe one or two or none apart from themselves? Why would you go back? Now, I do know that Tommy, when he went to Israel, again, it's national service. You go into the IDF, and then he went and he trained as an engineer in Germany afterwards. And I remember saying to him, but Tommy, why would you go back to a country that treated you so badly? And he said, because, well, he is a very forgiving nature, and he's one of these people who has tried, like you, to talk about things and to try and find solutions and to try and ensure it doesn't happen again. But he said, because quite simply, they were the best at engineering, the best training you were going to get there. So he went and he got his training, and then he went to England, and from there he came to Ireland, and he's never left Ireland since.
You know, Mary, when I went on the march, I went in 2008 as a chaperone. I walked through Auschwitz because I wanted to walk my father's steps, you know. And I found it too cold and too clean and too pristine, and everything was labeled and in its little containers. And I saw the suitcases and the hair and the shoes, and I wasn't moved by it. They were objects, belonging to people, but objects. And you know, the kids were crying, and we were trying very hard to comfort them. But when I got to there's a large thing of the gas chambers, like a 3D model, and paperwork, and it's an exhibit, paperwork, and this model and plans. That's when I started to cry, because to me, I'm thinking these human beings 5 years earlier came to work, built a house, built a tower, built a clock, whatever they were building. Now we're building something to eradicate, to murder innocent human beings, and to sit at that table and say, well, how can we make it bigger, and how can we get more people in here, and where should we drop the Zyklon B from, and how many steps from the showers to the clothing things should it be? To me, that's what got to me, that the inhumanity of a human being who could so not even question. Did they sit around and one person said, I can't do this, but I'm going to get fired, or I'm going to be put in jail? Like, I don't, you know, what was the conversation? That's what got to me, is the total inhumanity of the process, of the solution. Bigger, better, larger. That's what got to me. Quicker. The inhumanity of the human being.
They reduced people to, I always find that a great word, schmetz.
Yeah.
In Yiddish, it rags, isn't it?
Schmutz is dirt.
Dirt.
Shmata is a rag. A shmata, a rag.
I saw a quote there one day that they treated us like schmatza. And how's it pronounced?
Shmata.
Shmata. They reduced us to shmata. And
the rags, yeah.
Yeah, and just to rags, and we were nothing. Something that they could dispose of. And these midden piles where they just piled up all the bodies when they, if you look at Alfred Hitchcock's the Liberation of Bergen-Belsen, the hairs would stand on your head. I actually showed it in a lecture one time, and I think I had 2 complaints from students who I didn't have, but they complained that it was graphic, and the head of my department, her husband said, these are students who are going to be primary teachers. What do they expect? You can't sanitize. I had all these warnings up. If you're sensitive and you don't want to watch, leave. I showed the Alfred Hitchcock some of the documentary, and then I found out afterwards that 1 or 2 were just so shocked. But you have to be shocked.
Yeah, but they could be the same people who watch a horror movie on television, or shoot 'em up, one of those kinds of movies where there's gore and guts everywhere. Yeah,
gratuitous violence.
Exactly. So that's fantasy. So, you should be able to handle the real thing if you can handle the fantasy.
Oh, you could hear a pin drop with that. That documentary, the way it was done, the way he managed to pan the camera, all the photographs around to show that nobody could actually deny their presence.
Exactly, but you still have deniers. You still have saying that's all you know, Hollywood, and that didn't really happen, and maybe 5 people got killed. And I mean, I'm arguing with people all the time, right? I mean, you and I met on a Holocaust Facebook group, and I kept correcting the administrator. She was Italian, I believe, and I kept correcting her. And the next thing I know, I'm not there anymore. I'm blocked. Remember?
I haven't been blocked from the page yet.
I emailed you and I said, Mary, can you find out why I was blocked? What did I do? And she blocked you.
I remember that.
And she blocked you for asking why I was blocked.
Oh, she did. Oh, I can say I was blocked from something. Yeah, I wanted to know why you were blocked. I mean, everybody has a right to. Certainly, the daughter of a survivor has a right, if not a duty, to question.
Well, she was wrong. And I was saying, you know, that's not actually, and this is the number and stuff. And so from there, I met James McMillan, who also came to my defense, who also got blocked. And he teaches a course in Turkey to kids after school, a lot of Muslim kids after school, about the Holocaust genocide. That's the course name, Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And in the Holocaust section, he speaks about my father. He takes the kids to Saturday services at Shul or Friday night services at the synagogue, and they've gone to Auschwitz. They've had dinner with the Jewish community. And at the end of it all, they send me questions, which I answer. Some about my dad, some about what's going on. Really intelligent, smart questions that I'm thrilled to answer. And one boy just didn't believe it, said it was a hoax, whatever. And I, you know, spoke to him for quite a bit. At the end of the day, I said to him, so what are we going to do about this? If you hear this happening, if you hear anti-Semitism, if you hear it happening, what are you going to do now that I've spoken to you? He said, I'm going to speak up. One kid, one naysayer, I changed.
If you can change one, you're doing well.
Because that one will take that information to someone else who has misinformation. And that's
I was talking to Gillian Wallens-Perry there a couple of weeks back, and Gillian received an MBE from the Queen for her services to Holocaust education in the UK. Now, Gillian, she works alongside Anne Frank's stepsister. Now, when I say stepsister, Otto Frank, after the war, married her mother, and she has set up the Anne Frank Trust in England, in the UK, with Gillian Wallens-Perry. And we were talking about that, the importance of what she said is they teach youngsters in deprived areas, and they take certain children and they educate them about Anne, and then they get those children to go to schools and teach their peers about. And you know, and I was talking to her about the importance of Anne as a child to currently, because children now are at the closest they'll ever be to understanding what it must have been like for Anne Frank and children like Anne Frank, who were locked away in a room with people who in many cases were their families, but they were poles apart from in understanding. Their families didn't understand them. They didn't understand their families. Their diary understood them better than they did than their families. And, you know, I think children nowadays are at a point with COVID, lockdown and isolation, and being prevented from seeing their friends and seeing their family members outside of the immediate household, of understanding what it must have been like for a child like Anne Frank.
Well, it's relatable to them. It's not an adult trying to relate something to them. It's a child to a child.
It is a child who's growing up, going through puberty, seeing a boy inside in the house that she fancies, only that she can only talk to her dear Kitty. Mm-hmm. And Kitty is the only one that understands her, because she can read it, Kitty back, and she can change what she said and until she gets it right, and nobody mixes her words up. And we've all been through that. But
it's one thing to talk, but when you write, and you know this, Mary, because I like to write too, your thoughts are different in your head when you write. You know, when you're speaking at the moment, you're saying exactly what you want to say. But when you're writing, you're taking pause, you're thinking of the right word, you're expressing your emotion a lot better on paper. So to have a diary, to have a child like Anne have a diary, you know, she's not talking to her parents about how she's feeling because she knows the situation, and she's not going to be one of those, you know, whiny kids that says, I want to go outside. You know, how can we have nothing to eat? Those are her innermost personal thoughts.
Yeah.
That are just hers to her diary. And those are the most innocent, but the most truthful thoughts that one can have.
The most profound, because, you know, and it's interesting, I suppose, that she did call her diary Kitty, because she actually humanizes. She did the reverse of what the Nazis did. She treated something that was an inanimate object as a human being, whereas they were treating human beings as inanimate objects.
Listen, you didn't have a name anymore. You had a number. You weren't called by your name. Your friends called you by your name. You know, the roll call wasn't, you know, Joe or Bob or whatever. It was your number.
And in certain schools, children were, if they were Jewish children, they were called a Jewish name, even if it wasn't their name.
They were called Sarah or Ruth, and boys were called like Jacob.
Pardon?
Like what girls were usually called Ruth or Sarah, because those are the most Jewish names.
Yeah.
Men were like Jacob, like names like that. Yeah, because I looked at some of my father's documents, and in one document it said parents' name was Rachel, Sarah and Jacob, and I said, you know, that's not her name, but that's what it was. You know what I mean? Because he was a kid. He was 13, right? So that they wrote it down.
It was just bizarre. I actually spoke to a woman a few weeks ago as well, and she from Dublin, and she found out only 2 years ago that she was Lebensborn, and these children were, many of them were Jewish children who didn't look or whom the Nazis thought looked like the perfect Aryans. Therefore, as long as they looked the perfect Aryans, they were good enough to live, and they kidnapped them from their families. They grew up later on finding out they were actually Jewish. In her case, her mother had her for, she thinks, a Nazi foot soldier rather than a Nazi officer. She never met him, and she spent her whole life in and out of adoptions, being given back, taken again. The second time she was taken by family she loved, her adopted father, but it was tragic to see what the Nazis did, even to children who weren't Jewish. Do you know, who just because they wanted this look
model. Listen, I to this day can understand how a guard in a concentration camp on a train coming into a town can be so brutal to children, and then go home to his own children and have dinner, tuck them into bed, read them a story. I'll never understand that. I cannot understand that.
I can't understand it, because when you you look at there's a book, Let Me Go, My Mother and the SS. I think you read it, by Helga Schneider. And she was abandoned when she was 4 by her mother, and left to look after her 2-year-old brother, Peter. And 36 years later, she met her mother for the first time. And she asked her, how could you kill children, Mama? How could you abdicate your humanity to kill little children? And she said, quite simply, they would have grown up to be repugnant Jews.
Exactly. That's what it is.
The world had to rid itself of that repugnant race, and basically to eke out the root, you had to first get to the germ cell.
That's right. It boggles the mind how women could be so cruel towards children who had their own children, and men. I just, it sort of kind of reminds me of
She said, you could have done this to me, Mama. And look at Peter and I. She said, my children were Aryan, my children were perfect, as if she was speaking to the third person,
Well,
speaking to.
it's I don't have respect for any of those people, but I have a little bit of, when they had this power and they abused it, whether it was murder or stealing or taking, and they would come afterwards and say, I was there, I saw what happened, I am talking to deniers saying, I was there, I'm telling you it happened, okay? I'm regretful, I'm remorseful, whatever. I have a little bit of respect for that person who says he's sorry, but I have no respect for someone who cowers and says, well, I did what I had to do because, I was drafted, and no, you didn't. There's a little bit of conscience in everybody. And when you see something happening so brutal that it doesn't turn your stomach, I don't know, maybe after the 10th time, it doesn't turn your stomach anymore.
I'm not sure I agree with you that there's a little bit of conscience in everyone. I think some people are just sociopaths and psychopaths, that they're without conscience. The likes of Helge, or not Helge, Trudy Schneider. I mean, she said, she was completely remorseless to the very end. She said, I was proud to defend my Führer and my country, and I was proud to stand up with these men like Himmler and Eichmann and Göring. Wonderful leaders, great.
There was no consequence. They could get away with it. Nobody said boo to them. You want that piece of jewelry, take it. You want to smash that baby into a Beatine, go for it. Nobody said nothing. That's why those people who were in charge were so good at being in charge, because there wasn't that conscience. But not like, what I'm saying is, those in charge, look at Hitler. Hitler, the big man, kills himself at the end, if he killed himself at the end, because he didn't want to be captured. He didn't want to be, put to trial. Everybody else had to go. Those are the ones that took cyanide. Stand up for yourself and say, I did what I did for my country. No, they took the easy way out. They would have been hung anyway, but still stand up for what you believed in. But until you're caught, that's when the chicken comes out. That's when it was.
I think I saw a profound documentary there one time with the daughter of Amon Goth.
I just read her book. Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, there's a situation where you're completely torn, and you're saying to yourself, you look at the woman who has spent her whole life feeling guilty for what her father did and for being the daughter of Amon Goth, and has, I suppose, drank herself into oblivion to try and forget she is the daughter of Amon Goth. And you look and you think that they not only created victims of the people that they detested more than anything on earth, but they also created victims of the children that they so-called, or they thought were actually the perfect Aryan race.
Children and grandchildren. I told you when I went on the march, when we came out of Auschwitz going up towards Birkenau, the streets were lined with police officers and all kinds of military from all over the world, because there's about 21,000 people there in many, many countries there. And the streets were lined with Polish people, not old ones, but I mean in their 40s and their 30s, 40s, 50s and up, with big signs like "Forgive us, forgive our parents' sins, forgive us for what we do," coming and trying to hug these survivors who were like taken aback by all this stuff. And they had these little medals, these coins struck with forgiveness on them. They were trying to hand them out. And I thought, you know what? I don't protest I didn't protest it, okay? If a survivor was going to take it and give you a hug, that's not for me to say. It is not for me to forgive. I cannot forgive. It's not for me to forgive.
That's actually what I was going to talk about. As I said to you, I think I'm interviewing Eva Schloss, whose mother married Otto Frank after the war. Now, Eva Schloss grew up with Anne Frank before the war. They were in the same camp together, or they lost all their family members, Anne's mother and Anne and her sister died, and Eva's father died, and then his parents, her mother and Anne's father married after the war. So she looks on herself as being Anne's stepsister, rightly so, and she has tried to keep Anne's memory. But it was interesting when I was sharing it there the other day. Somebody said, "Oh, do you know she's not." In the Netherlands, people are critical of her because she has shown forgiveness, and she's trying to promote the Christian notion of forgiveness. And people have said to me, say about Tommy, that being a humanitarian, and that how can you forgive, and you can. It's an interesting dynamic when you use the words "I forgive," and you say to yourself, but really, if you look at forgiveness, is it you that can forgive, or can you forgive what has been done to other people who have died? You can't really. You can use the words "I forgive," and you can try and bring peace in the world and make sure it doesn't happen again. And you can forgive somebody doing something to you, but how can your father forgive, Lord rest him, forgive for his parents, for his grandparents, the torture done to them? They're dead.
For me to forgive would be a slap not only to my father's face, but to his family and to all those that were killed for no reason other than the fact they were Jewish or gypsies or whatever, okay? Political prisoners, thinkers, whatever, for innocent people.
Gays and Christians.
Christians. For me to say, hey, the past was in the past, move on, never going to happen out of my mouth. Okay, it's never going to come out of my mouth. Okay, if my father could not forgive, I am not forgiving. Somebody else wants to forgive, that's totally up to them. That's an individual.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be criticized for it. Okay.
No.
Not be criticized, because if that's the way that they can get on with life, then that's the way they can get on with life. But I personally will never forgive.
Some people, I suppose, feel that in forgiving others, you're somehow healing yourself. But at the same time, you look at the people who have died, and they didn't survive to forgive.
Right. So am I supposed to say, hey, this happened 75, 80 years ago, I'm sorry, I forgive you? No, I have no family on my father's side. Nobody. My father didn't have parents. He didn't have cousins. He had one cousin. Am I supposed to forgive that? Never, ever gonna happen. Not gonna happen.
That's interesting, Toba. When you grew up, I remember asking you this before, you grew up with survivors as family members who became your family because they shared probably as much as biology with you. They shared the experiences of your father, something that very few other people could share, even within families could share the same suffering.
We didn't call them an uncle, but when it came to simchas, like family things, they were there. That's who my father wanted. I remember when I first got married and we were going through a guest list, and he said, if my family was here, that's all I would want. But because I have this expanse of survivors who are my family now, they're all coming. Like, don't even question it. They're all coming. And, there was quite a few. But this, which was great, because that means that many more survived, okay? And they came from Israel. They came from the States. No, they came, there was no one in Poland, but they came from Israel. They came from the States. They came from Germany. They came, for my father. This was a simcha, and my father would get in the car and drive to Philadelphia for every simcha. We would drive to Rochester, New York for every simcha. Like, wherever they could go, they would go. And originally my father made application to come into the United States, and he was denied for whatever reason it was. But I mean, this was family now. This was your family. I was just commenting to somebody, one of my friends. I grew up in Kensington Market, which was very Jewish, moved to an Italian neighborhood, and then we moved here, which is a very Jewish area, not as much as anymore, but back then. I went to school with kids whose parents were Holocaust survivors. I didn't know. No one talked about it. It was so normal that no one's, hey, do you know about her parents, or did you hear about this one? Not until my later years, even 10 years ago. I didn't know half the people I went to school with whose parents were survivors. No one spoke about it. It was just normal.
Yeah.
It was nothing out of the ordinary in this neighborhood.
It's like Tommy when he said he was in when he was in Bergen-Belsen. He said, you know, that, and he showed photographs. There were photographs taken, but not of him, but of a child running down and seeing these midden piles of bodies and playing, and how it was just normal for them to play amongst the corpses. They thought, no, when something is so normal to you as a child, you have no other frame of reference.
No, none. And like I said, somebody once asked me if I felt any guilt that I lived a better life than my father did, right? And I said, not at all. I said, I don't feel any guilt at all. I feel protectiveness, and I was always very protective of him. But I never felt guilt because my father would have shed tears to know that my brother, my sister, my mother, his grandchildren didn't live life to the fullest. And you know, you need to live life to the fullest. Even now with COVID, you need to live life to the fullest. If you be careful, be wary of where you are and what you're doing, but you got to live life to the fullest. These people, our parents, our grandparents did not survive this horror for you not to enjoy life. That's their biggest mitzvah. That's their biggest joy, is to see you enjoying.
Isn't it interesting, Toba? Well, interesting, maybe not the phrase to use, but I often think of your dad, and I often think of people like your dad, who tragically, for the last 10 years of his life, had Alzheimer's.
8 years, yeah.
How many?
7. Sorry, I'm sorry. 7.
7 years. Yeah, the last 7 years, and you know, by virtue of what Alzheimer's is, the long-term memory is great, short-term memory is shot. He was constantly, his mind must have been constantly back in the experiences that he was at. So he was living for 7 years a life of inner turmoil. He must have.
You know, my dad always took a bath, never a shower, because of the concentration, you know, going into the gas chambers, and maybe it's a shower, maybe it's not. So it was always a bath. And then when he started taking his showers, because we had to shower him, he would scream and yell, save me, save me. And he'd say the Shema, and he'd be like, it was horrible. Take me 20 minutes, like just holding him, trying to like calm him down, get him dressed. And I mentioned that on one of my posts, and people were saying, I never realized that that's why my parent won't shout, like screams when they go into the shower. I had something really interesting. You know, I used to come home sometimes. He didn't know who I was. I went from Toba to Deer to Good Girl to Deer to Tevya. I don't know who Tevya was. There's no Tevya in our family. I would come home sometimes and he'd be jabbering away talking. And I say, Daddy, who are you talking to? My brothers. Who are you talking to? My mother. I said, okay, if you see him, I see him. Okay. And it was very interesting because when I came back from the march, I was showing pictures of my trip. And I said, Daddy, come see, because he would never let me go to Poland. I was invited several times and he would never let me go. And I figured now he's not well, he won't know. And I said, Daddy, come look at my pictures. And he looked in and he walked away. I said, Daddy, don't you want to see them? And he goes, I was there. I don't need to see pictures. And I thought, wow. He didn't know his own name. He looked in the mirror and he didn't know who he was. He would cry because he thought it was somebody he knew and wouldn't come and talk to him. But he looked at those pictures and said, I was there. I don't need to. That's what he remembered.
Months ago, about 2 months ago, I interviewed Michael Metalist, who was a survivor of Auschwitz-Birkenau. And he's got early stages dementia. He's 91, but he's got dementia. All he wanted to do was play his mandolin, which was lovely. But the horror on his daughter Susie's face was just, I just can't erase it. It was like Susie was living his life vicariously and trying to find out, a bit like Eisenstein's book, I was a child of Holocaust survivors,
I
where
met
she,
Very nice. I met her many years ago.
I'd love to meet her, but her book is very powerful. The way she talks about, searching for her father's experiences in the lost and found, and how she didn't know where her life began, where their lives ended, her life began, and that she never felt that her life would ever be in any way as profound as the experiences her father went through and the survival of her parents, and that and the effect it has on the next generation. Sometimes the next generation are struggling so hard to remember for their parents, like Susie was, while their parents are trying to forget. And
Well,
Michael just kept saying to her, "I don't want to remember. It's too awful. I don't want to remember."
I
And
wish I wish I asked more questions. I wish I asked more questions. I spoke so openly. My father spoke so openly about it, and I wish I had asked more questions. But my conscience wouldn't let me. Like I said, I protected, not guilt, protected,
yeah,
because he already had the nightmares at night. I heard them at night, and I didn't want a question answered, and then that thought be in his head when he went to sleep. That I couldn't. So he did do a Shoah tape for Spielberg's Shoah, and it's in Yiddish. I've listened to it several times, and he's filled in a lot of the blanks for me. But I was so conscious of not hurting him and making him feel things. I asked him once about his mother. I think she had black hair. How was your dad? And he had a beard. What about your sister? She used to like to laugh. What about the other ones? I don't remember. I didn't want. Well, can't you remember? Don't you remember like what they did or what? I just couldn't do it. I just could not be the one to make him sleep that night thinking of that stuff.
remember, it's just. Did you ever think of writing a book about it, Toba? Because you are a beautiful writer.
Thank you. I write little short stories.
Way of telling a story and putting it down, and it's almost like you're actually sitting in the room listening, or like we are here just chatting. You write as you speak.
Yeah.
It's almost like a dialogue that you're having with yourself and just putting it down as you're having it. And
Well, thank you for the compliment coming from you, the big writer. I appreciate that. I didn't know. That's not that I wouldn't know where to start. I just have, my book would be of reminiscence and stories and poems and things that I do that honor him. It wouldn't be like a story. You know what I mean? And
I'm so honored that your poem is in my book.
I'm honored that my poem is in your book, and I'm honored that my father is in your book.
Oh, your father's everywhere in the book, and you're everywhere in the book, because I wasn't even, I'd say I wasn't long started it, and Jesus, it was an epic journey. In every way, physically, mentally, emotionally,
I remember
traumatic, and
your computer died. You had to get a new computer. Yeah.
I had the person that has my computer said he hasn't thrown it out, so I'll get it back. Do you remember you said to me you should hold on to the computer? It was all sellotaped up.
Yep, I remember that. Yeah.
I'm surprised I wasn't electrocuted because of all the thing holding the wires in, but I just didn't want to let it go because I felt superstitious.
But that was your life. That was your blood and sweat in that computer.
Yeah, and when you said to me, I want you, sent me the poem, I thought, oh, what an honor that was, so it went into the start of the book.
It did.
But what was I going to say to you? Do you think that Holocaust survivors pass on the trauma? How much do you think Holocaust survivors and survivors of all genocides, it doesn't end with their experiences. It carries into their next lives. You were lucky. You had a great dad who adored you and you were very protective over. But many, like Art Spiegelman, didn't get on with their parents.
It's very, very sad. I think I said to you last time we spoke that, here we go talking about forgiveness again, where I said I can't forgive. Now there's certain things, Our parents were children. Most of them were children at the time, taken from their parents with no guidance. You know, there weren't classes on how to be a parent and how to cook and how to do this. You know, you learned from your parents at home. You learned your hard work from your parents at home. All of a sudden, you're thrown into a group of men age 12 to 65, 70, working in a detail, no women around, no one to comfort you, no one to give you advice, no one to tell you how to be a kid, how to be a teenager. All of a sudden you're survived, you're thrown out into the world with nothing. People were marrying people so that they had company and companionship. And, you know, the brother married the sister and the cousin married the uncle because that's who they knew. And people from the camps, you know, married one another. So you need to forgive that part of your of your parents or grandparents' world, because they didn't know how to do it. They came with nothing. They worked hard. Some, you know, and some took out their anger on their kids, and some thought that's the only way to discipline a kid because that's how they were disciplined, with no food or, you know, standing at attention for 3.5 hours or with a whip. They didn't know any better. I was lucky. My dad was the sweetest guy ever. Like, oh, you can see the smile on his face. That was him all the time. All the time. He took such joy.
And even in the latter stages of his life, when he had Alzheimer's, somewhere deep down inside, he knew he was adored. Because I don't think I think that was one of the things I loved most about you as a friend. I just was the love you have for your dad, and the unashamed love you have for your dad. Love and your dad.
He was my hero in so many ways. And sometimes when things are really bad and tough and I'm so frustrated and distraught, I say, how dare you? Like, you're going through stuff that look at what your father went through. This is absolutely nothing, like shame on you kind of thing, right? And I'm so protective of my kids too. Like, they don't understand how protective I am because, you know, I'm their parent and I am concerned about things that they do and don't do and listen and don't listen. It gets me frustrated like any other parent.
But that's not right for you either, Toba, because, you know, your problems and your worries of that day deserve to be vocalized, and you deserve to have to wallow in self-pity for the particular length of time that you're suffering without feeling that like Bernice Eisenstein again, never feeling that her life would ever be, or anything that she would ever suffer would be in any way comparable to what her parents suffered. Everyone's suffering is individual, and you know, so your dad's suffering was on another scale altogether, but you're suffering on a daily basis. Your constant migraines that you get. I'm a migraine sufferer. Less people actually suffer migraines. You know, you get the usual thing like, oh, I know I get terrible headaches as well, and you're thinking this is not a headache. You know, so we all have this our moments where our troubles are the biggest in the world, and I don't think you should deprive yourself of that moment of suffering and wallowing in self-pity.
I don't deprive myself of it. What I'm trying to say is, like, I you know, it's not a big deal. Okay, at the moment it's a big deal, but it's not a 5-year deal. Do you know what I mean? Like, every day
eventually.
Yeah, I don't, like, tomorrow it'll be finished, right? But just to, you know, yell and scream that particular moment just to get my frustration out. But like I said, my dad, I mean, you know, $20 in his pocket, here's the paycheck, do what you want with the house. You know, whatever you make is beautiful. Don't buy a schmutta, make sure you look nice all the time, you know, always smiling, always laughing. I told you when he passed away, he used to bring home garbage. And I'd say, Daddy, what are you bringing home this garbage for? And he'd say, it's not garbage, it's not garbage. And I always thought it was because, you know, he needed things, like he needed things. And then when he passed away, people were saying to me, your dad was such a mensch, you know, I was short on money, and he said to me, listen, sell me something. And that's how we got the plate with the crack in it. And that's how we got the tulip picture and the doll with no nose, because it didn't matter what it was. My father didn't want someone to beg for something. You know, here's $5 for that broken dish. And that's how I am.
I'm like that too.
I do a lot of volunteer work
My
because
dad was like that.
I do a lot of volunteer work because I know somewhere in those 5 years, someone did something nice for my father, either gave him a piece of bread or, a drink of something of theirs that helped him. And now it's my turn to say thank you by helping back. And that's,
What's interesting about the bread, because Art Spiegelman used to talk about how his father, Vladik, used to go around with the bread in his pocket, or he'd steal the container from the side of the hospital bed and wear the same suit ad nauseum because he didn't think he needed another suit. He was fine, he had this suit, and that was it. And you told me your dad used to go around with bread in his pocket. It's amazing how many survivors of the Holocaust went around for the rest of their lives, even in the best of suits, but with a piece of bread inside in their pocket.
And surprisingly enough, more so during the time that he had the dementia, because of the long-term memory. I'd always be pulling cookies or bread out of his pocket. He'd wear the same sweater all the time. If you took it to wash it, oh my God, you better wash it the same day because he's going to wear that sweater. And when he's wearing these awful sneakers, and I bought him a really good pair of sneakers, and he goes, well, what am I going to do with 2 pairs of shoes? And I said, throw out those pair and wear this pair. He goes, but it's a good pair. Daddy, there's got no heels on it anymore. Please wear these shoes. Like, what am I going to do with 2 pairs of anything? What am I going to do with 2 shirts, And that was the kind of guy he was. You needed 5 shirts, Toba, buy 5 shirts. Your sister needs 5 shirts, buy 6. Your brother needs something, buy 2. Me, I'm good with 1. That was my dad. That was him.
It must have been his whole world, because what you got, I suppose, and I'm sure I'm absolutely certain you realize it. You and your sister and your brother represented so much more, and people like you represented much more than even being children of somebody. You were their future. You were their slap in the face to the Nazis. You were their proof that they had survived. Not only had they survived, but your ethnic group, the Jewish race, could continue. And I think it's very poignant when you see the movie Schindler's List and you see the end of it, where every one of these Schindler Jews are coming out, those that were alive at the time of filming, and they place a stone and they have their daughter or their granddaughter or grandson with them. And you think there was this effort to eradicate one particular group of people from the face of the earth, but despite them, these are what...
Now you have the IDF, who's children of children of children, grandchildren, grandchildren, defending a country, defending a people. So, out of...
I interviewed a woman.
The griffin, out of the ashes comes the phoenix.
Phoenix rising. And I interviewed a woman one day, doctor, and she's living in Israel, and she wrote a book she wrote a PhD on the victims of the Holocaust who became members of the IDF. And then she subsequently did a postdoctoral research on those members, those survivors who went on to become, to join the Israeli Air Force. And out of the 350 pilots, I think it was in the Air Force, I think something like 300 were Holocaust survivors.
Children. Oh yeah, back.
Yeah, who actually went on, who were children during the Holocaust and joined the IDF, then went on and became pilots.
Yeah, but that's what happened when they all went to Israel. They knew that they had to defend that country, and they knew that this was their homeland now, that they were not going to go back to what they came from. Also out of fear to go back. It could happen 5 minutes after the war was over. How many people walk back? Like I said, how many people went home to violence? Like when I went to Poland, I got spit on. I mean, this is 2008. I got spit on. This woman came up to me, said something in Polish. I bent down to say, I'm sorry, I don't understand you. And she spit right in my face, on my jacket, actually, right here. So, I mean, how old was she? 60? 65? So still there. It's still,
It's absolutely still, it's frighteningly still there. And, and it's happening, in very, in ways that are not very obvious to a lot of people. But because you're so involved in the subject, and I'm so involved in the subject, you see the ramifications much beyond, say, COVID, or much beyond lockdown, or much beyond, and you become paranoid about everything. But
this is when it steers. So I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is when it stirs the pot, because you're home, you're doing nothing, you're bored, you're on internet or TikTok or whatever, Facebook. You're listening and looking at all these hateful things, and you're bored. You got no other outlet, and you're going, yeah, I'm going to do that too. Yeah, that sounds like good. That sounds good to me. Yeah, it's their fault. Yeah, it's their problem. How many people have I seen wearing shirts that say COVID is a Jewish problem? COVID brought to you by the Jews. How many times have you seen that T-shirt? I've seen it 100 times. No shame in wearing it. There's no shame in wearing it.
I just think the Jews are blamed for everything.
But look at Israel. I once had these arguments with these BDS supporters, and I said, listen, I support you 100%. If you're completely 100% of it, true to what you're saying, I said, let's discuss it. You're using Word, which was developed in Israel. You're using a GPS, which was part of the Israeli army. You're using voicemail. Medications. You don't want to eat food with a 972 area code. That's fine. Don't. But know that the food you're eating in Brazil or Argentina or wherever it is using Israeli technology. The medications are using around the world, Ativa, all these, that's Israeli. So if you don't want to use this stuff, stop what you're doing, throw out your computer, go find one that doesn't have any of these things in it, throw out your phone. And look, they finally listened to me. I once said to somebody, listen, you're just around the corner from me. I said, I'll meet you for coffee. There was 4 people. I said, I'll meet you for coffee and we can discuss this. Only one said, okay.
Well, fair play to that one that said it, because, I just think all battles are won through dialogue, we see it here in our own country, here in the north of Ireland, say, for instance. It took people from all sides to go around a table and sit down and have the peace talks for there to have been, however lasting or however kind of delicate they are, to bring peace to the north of Ireland. It's not going to happen by one person saying, oh, I'm 100% right and I'm 100%. It takes people from both sides coming together to talk.
Yeah, exactly. This guy didn't meet me, but he said that he completely understood what I was saying and that was something he needed to think about. And he was a university student. And I said, it's very easy to follow the crowd, to be one part of something without knowing what you're being part of.
Do you ever see that photograph? It's probably the most poignant photograph I've ever seen. It was taken during World War II, and it was taken, I think, at the 1939 Nuremberg rally. At the Nuremberg rally, and they're all standing there, and they're all doing the salute. And there's one guy, and
I love that picture. Yeah.
And there's thousands there, and he is so conspicuous by his ability to one, be his own person and to not follow the crowd. And I think he stands out. He stands out because of that. The rest just pale into they become the sheep.
Well, there's a commercial. I honestly couldn't tell you what I'm not sure if it airs there, but it airs here. And some guy's mad about something and he's protesting. And then someone joins him and he's protesting. Next thing you know, there's 10 people protesting with them, and 20 people, and a whole stadium full of people, and then a whole park full of people, like thousands and thousands. And everyone's sitting down and screaming. And one guy turns to the other guy and says, what are we protesting about? What's this about? and the guy says, I have no idea. He goes, okay. And they start protesting again. And that's what happens. That's what happens, right?
Whispers. One says something to, and then they all, or there was a thing done years ago. I think it was in London. It was, and it was a psychiatric kind of a testing, and they had a group of people inside the room, and they were telling them all that what they were looking at was, I think it was a certain color, and one by one they all started to agree, oh yeah, it is. Now it was like black, and they were saying it was red, and everyone was saying, yeah, it's red. And one guy, they were all actors, and this one guy was looking at them and saying, it's not, it's red. And eventually he started to doubt himself and started to think, well, maybe it's a trick. And so he started to go along with them, and they said, what color? And he said, yeah, it's black. It wasn't to do with colors, it was to do with numbers. 1 and 1 makes two.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Is like dressed gold and white, or is it black and green? That or the
Yeah. But you know, if you tell somebody, and if enough people tell people, you want to be very strong. And I think because I'm an only child of an only child, I think I was always able to plow my own furrow, as my mum would say, and be able to kind of I never needed to follow sheep.
Well, that's the problem. A lot of people want to be involved. They want to be part of something, whether they agree with it or not. They want to be part of it, and they follow it along without knowing. You know, I always say, without consequence to an action, there is no fear.
But if you're being told constantly that you're on the right side because you're helping the oppressed, people are easier to become malleable more easily if they think that they're doing something for the right reasons and for humanity.
It's the cause.
For the cause. We use that phrase here in Ireland as well. But so it's easier to actually make people go along with the crowd if they think that, oh well, I'm doing it for humanity. And it's only when they sit down and they talk to somebody with a completely different view that they realize, you know, I can have my view still, and she can have her view still, but it doesn't stop us from being able to talk about it.
There are some things that are correct that you're saying, and some things that you're correct that the other person is saying. And so stop and listen to both sides, and then make up your mind. But you know how many people follow a crowd, and then there's always those people within the crowd that cause the strife and the problems, and because they're there for that reason. They're there to be in that crowd to instigate. There's no other reason for them to be there. So they take something that's very peaceful or nice or whatever, and they come and they instigate, which gets the crowd riled. And then everybody goes, well, yeah, I need to now do that. I need now to dump that car.
Which is why I absolutely hate this cancel culture. I mean, you know, irrespective of whether you absolutely profoundly disagree with somebody that's coming to a college to talk, I think everybody should be allowed to speak, say what they have to say, and challenge them on it, and show them up if you think that you're 100% right and they're 100% wrong. Dialogue, engage with them and say, you're wrong, and this is why I believe you're wrong, and talk about it. But this fear of debate, this fear, this profound arrogance, quite frankly, to believe that your opinion is the only one that matters.
Well, I like when someone says something, then they challenge, and that person will give a fantastic rebuttal, and then that person who is challenging goes,
okay.
They only know that one little thing that they ever talk about, but when you challenge it and put in something new, they're dumbfounded. I've seen so many of them going, I don't think you understand my question. My question, right? Oh, I understood it. You just can't, you got nothing more than what you just said.
Yeah, they're sound bites.
Yeah, that's all you, nothing more than that.
But Toba, my love, it was fabulous talking to you, and you looked fabulous, and you were articulate as always.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what will you do now for the rest of the day? Will you read? Are you out of lockdown in Toronto?
No, we 2 weeks ago, we were put on a 4-week lockdown and stay home orders. And then I think it was yesterday, he extended it another 2 weeks. So now we're to the middle of May. The vaccine here, I can't really speak about it. I got mine in March 6th. My second one is until June 26th. People are not until July and August trying to get them. I go to work, I come home. The only time I go out is to do some grocery shopping or the bank or something. Don't see anybody, don't go anywhere. Sometimes my grandson comes over, but my son's working from home. My other daughter's home with her kids, and my other daughter's been off work for over a year now. And so it's tough, it's hard. People are getting, mentally and physically sick. And it's very scary to see your children, anyone's child or person feeling that way. And I'm hoping like people just listen, stay home, give it 2 weeks, give it a month. Like the numbers are rising here in Toronto, in Canada and Ontario. And, they've set up some, not like tents in some of our hospitals for the overflow. They're outside now. So, the surgery has been canceled. You can only do takeout. There's no patio. Big box stores were open, and now it's essentials only. So you can go to a big supermarket, and if they sold clothes or anything like that, it's all roped off. And it's hard. It's tough. It's really tough. But like anything else, we'll muddle through it.
We'll have to get through it.
Not much else you can do.
Your father would have got through it. He'd have said to people, "Oh, toughen up."
No, well, I can't tell you what he said because then you'd have to bleep it out.
So, but thanks ever so much. I'm so glad I finally got you on.
You be well and you be safe, okay?
You too. You too. Shindera Lesh an Clár. That's the end of the show for today. Until the next time, Lacuna of Day, Bawalam Tugalir, Chicana, Sonas, Agus Gro, Agus Gade, Ship Sloan.